Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the Focus on Photography podcast. I'm Rusty Brown. Appreciate you guys stopping by. Today I'm talking about some of the differences between JPEG and RAW and pluses and minuses of both, and which ones should be used based on certain situations, right? So whether or not to shoot in JPEG or RAW, it's a personal decision. Both have merit and there are pluses and minuses to both. I'm going to dive into those and I'm going to give you 5 things to consider when choosing between JPEG and or RAW. The first thing that I want to get out the way, though, is that I don't think one method is necessarily better than the other. I don't think it's a competition. This topic gets a lot of attention depending upon where you are in your photography journey, and I'm hoping to be able to uh, tamp down some of the rhetoric that you may or may not have heard in that space and present something fairly even across the board that may help you if you're struggling with, should I shoot JPEG, should I shoot RAW? At least this way you'll have these 5 considerations, and it's a start, right? So let me start off with a couple of just basic definitions, right? So what's a RAW file? RAW files are uncompressed, unprocessed, unfiltered raw data that comes right off of your camera's sensor. It can't be viewed by the human eye. You have to have a special type of viewer to actually, or program, I should say, to look at a raw file. It has to be converted to another format to be viewed, as something else would, whether that's a TIFF file or a JPEG for actual viewing. But when it starts off as a RAW, it's just that, it's very raw. And because they're unprocessed, they don't have any added sharpening to them. There's no corrections for chromatic aberration. There's no added saturation or contrast or any of those types of things applied to a raw image. As a matter of fact, if you look at a raw image natively, it could be fairly unimpressive because it's flat, not flat in size, but flat in terms of the way that it looks, because it's just the data, and that data needs to be shaped into something else. JPEG, on the other hand, is a standard image file format. It's quite recognizable. I'm sure everyone's familiar with it. A JPEG file can be read by almost anything, any type of viewer. It's easily read in your email, internet browsers, World Wide Web. Most viewers can, take a look at a JPEG and you can see it right away. The thing about a JPEG, and if you think, one other thing I would say about that is it's probably a universal method of displaying images. I would think that you can view a JPEG pretty much anywhere in the world, or you could take a JPEG file and send it anywhere in the world, and whoever you're sending it to wouldn't have to do anything to view that. Whereas if you send a RAW file to someone, they would have to do something to be able to view that. But unlike a RAW file, the JPEG is heavily processed, and it's processed your image in certain ways. It undergoes what I would call a series of, let's say, modifications, right? Those modifications all happen in camera, and they include compression, meaning it's going to make the file smaller. It's going to increase the sharpening. It's going to increase the saturation. It's going to increase the contrast. The amounts of those vary based on the camera manufacturer and some of the settings you may have, but all of that happens in camera. So as soon as you do the click, that decision has been made once you decided to go with a JPEG file. I would say that the fundamental difference between RAW and JPEG is when and where the processing decisions are made and whether or not you're part of it. Meaning, If you decide that the processing decision is that I don't want to be part of that decision and I'm going to let the camera do it all, then obviously you're going JPEG. If you're deciding that there's some tweaks I need to do, some editing I need to do, I want to have full control over my editing workflow of an image, then you're going to go RAW. So I talked about 5 considerations. Let's lay them out and talk about it. Consideration number 1, speed and workflow. For me, this win goes to JPEG. A JPEG file requires 0 processing. You can share them instantly, whereas a RAW file, it demands time. Now, the amount of time varies, but at the end of the day, you can't just shoot a RAW, give it to someone, or shoot a RAW and post it on your favorite social media site. So if a key element of your workflow is speed, and you want to get something done super quickly, then that's clearly JPEG is the way to go for that, because you can't get any faster than you can with a JPEG. Consideration number 2, dynamic range and recovery. This to me is a win for the RAW. RAW files capture extreme highlights, right? And a wide range of darks and shadows, right? And JPEGs clip those very things. So the JPEG is cutting off this end of the highlights and it's cutting off this end of the darks and the shadows, and it's giving you that. And once that's done, it can't be undone. To try to stretch the those two extremes of a JPEG file is what's known as destructive editing, and it's going to ruin the image. So when we talk about dynamic range, to get from the darkest darks to the brightest highlights, that's a win for the RAW file, because you have so many variables in it that you can do, and they're all non-destructive. If you think about dynamic range with regards to definition, the dynamic range is basically the measurable contrast ratio between the darkest darks and the brightest highlights in a scene. So when you look at different camera manufacturers and you see or hear the term, oh, I get more dynamic range with this camera than that camera, what we're talking about is, as an example, a camera that shoots 15 megapixel RAW files has greater dynamic range than a JPEG image. But a camera that shoots 30 megapixel RAW files has greater dynamic range than the one that shoots 15 megapixels. And a camera that shoots 50 megapixel RAW files has greater dynamic range than the 30 and obviously the 15. So when you look at sensor size, and this is primarily with your full frame cameras, but I guess we could throw in a couple of APS-Cs in there. But when you look at the sensor size and what type of, what size RAW file is output from that sensor, that's where you get the idea of how much dynamic range is there. So these cameras that are shooting 50 megapixel RAWs and up have a significant amount of dynamic range, which gives the photographer more room within that range to make edits that do not destroy the image. And it's a matter of personal preference. The cameras that I use primarily are the Sony a7R5. Native compressed RAW is 61 megapixels, but I have mine configured for what's known as lossless RAW, which means that out of the camera, each one of these photos is about 75 megapixels, which is a pretty large file, but it's a massive amount of dynamic range, and it's something that's important to me. But when you talk about that size, that leads to consideration number 3, storage and file size. In this particular consideration, I have to give the win to JPEG, because a JPEG a JPEG file is so small that you can get many of them in places, in terms of storage, you can get many more of them than you can on a RAW file. The JPEG, you can get more of them on your memory card. And when you set up your camera for JPEG, when you're looking at how many shots you have left, you get so many more if you pick JPEG. You get more space and storage for your JPEGs on your external drives and your hard drives and your computer drives also. And we all know how precious memory is today with regards to how expensive it is and how much it costs. And if you're into cloud storage, you can get more images, right, in the JPEG format for the money you're paying for your cloud storage. So when you talk about storage and file size, there's not a comparison at all. Like I was just saying a moment ago, the raw files can get quite big, and obviously the raw file gets edited. Using myself as an example again, when I'm done editing a raw file, the output is a TIFF. And based on the number of layers and the complexity of the edit, a lot of my TIFF files are in excess of 2 GB. That's one picture, one photo. So if storage and file size are important to you, then clearly JPEG is the way to go for that one. Consideration number 4 is editing control and quality. And I'm going to give that win to raw files because you have so much more space, as we talked about, with the dynamic range. And if you think about, like, in old school, before digital, there was film, and when you took pictures, you would submit the roll of film in. Whenever you got your images back, you got back a negative. So if you think about a raw file is like a digital negative, but it has full white balance and color control. And I'm going to show you what that means here in just a second. Whereas JPEGs, they bake all that in, and like I said before, it leaves a lot less room to correct a mistake. There are some things that you can do in post-processing in a JPEG image. Those things are limited, and the amount of the amount or the depth of the thing that you're doing is also quite limited, again, before it becomes destructive. The final consideration 5, can go in either direction. And that consideration is intent and output needs. And you have to think about what that means, right? So if you're just an everyday casual shooter, you're shooting shots, of the family, nothing too stressful, you just shooting to post on your favorite social media site, then JPEG is the way to go. But if you're doing professional work, or if you're doing artistic work, or if you're doing work that you deem is going to be print or portfolio worthy, then there you have to consider RAW. And for me, the complete life cycle of an image is one that is portfolio worthy, which for me means I'm going to print it. When you see an image in print, it just hits different than it does on the small screen of a phone. Just my opinion. I don't print everything. I don't print a lot, but I do print the ones that I believe are portfolio worthy to me. And you may be able to see a couple of the images on the wall behind me. I have a gallery wall with 5 images that I keep up at any given time. Those sizes are 17 inches by 22 inches. And the final output that was printed was a TIFF file that originated as a RAW. And there's no way I could print that size of a file and get that level of color reproduction and accuracy and sharpness from a JPEG. If I attempted to print a JPEG that size, it would be very pixelated and it would not look good at all. The other thing I have over here off camera is my portfolio. Anything that I deem portfolio worthy gets printed there. Now those are, what are they, 11 by 17, I believe, a little smaller than the ones on the wall, but the quality of those prints is equally as important to me. So, when I think about, the intent and the output, I don't shoot for social media. I don't shoot for Instagram. I shoot because it's what I like to do. But my hope is that every now and again, one of the shots that I get will be print worthy or portfolio worthy. And if that's the case, RAW is the way to go. So when you think about everything I just said here, right, just keep in mind, what's the purpose? Are you shooting with intention? What's the purpose of the photos? Think about storage and memory constraints, if you have any. Think about the level of post-processing required or desired, right? And when you consider which way to go, and then think about the time and workflow efficiency. Because I'm a hobbyist, it's rare that I'm on the clock when I shoot. I take some jobs, most of them are sports related, and where I have to get a product back in a certain amount of time. But most of my work is my own, so consequently, um, I don't have a need to speed through. So that's why for me, raw works better. There is one thing to consider also. Most modern day cameras will allow you to shoot RAW and JPEG simultaneously. And that may be something that you're interested in, meaning you take one shot and either the RAW file followed by the JPEG file is sent to the same memory card, or if you have two card slots, you can send the JPEG to one and the RAW to the other. If you're going to a single card, be mindful, you're going to fill up the card faster. If you're going to dual card slots, you're just going to have to use more cards. But you may want the what's the best way to say it? You may want the safety net of the raw file, right? And the convenience of a ready to use JPEG. People who do this a lot, events, primarily weddings. When I used to do weddings, that was one of the things that I considered, because there was a time when I was a 100% JPEG shooter, straight up, because I would look at it, I thought it looked fine. Over time, I started to view my images differently, and I became more critical of some of the flaws and errors in them, and I realized I can correct them if I, started shooting in RAW. But for something that has to be delivered fairly quickly, if you're shooting a wedding and for the most part every shot is good, you can just look at your JPEGs, make your copies, and deliver them. If there are one or two shots within the for the day of the wedding or whatever reception, what have you, that might require a little more detail and touch up, you would have the raw version to do that. So if your camera shoots in both raw and JPEG, you may want to consider doing both and then get a feel for which way you tend to lean when you do that. And at some point in time, you'll start to favor one over the other. What I want to do now, though, I want to give you a demonstration using the exact same image of the depth and breadth that you can get to with a raw file that you cannot get to with a JPEG. And for that, I'd like to thank my good friend LB from Creations by LB. I'll put a link to his website and his social in the description. But LB is a good friend and a fellow photographer. And recently, he, along with my wife Denise, we all went to Victoria, British Columbia, to try to photograph some whales and other wildlife on the sea. It was a great trip. Had a really good time. The whales weren't very cooperative, but I did get some good shots, and I was glad that I did the trip. But we spent a week in this really nice town, Victoria, British Columbia, and we were going around and getting some shots up. So on one of these days, LB met someone who was celebrating a birthday, and while he was out going around town and shooting, and he got some shots. And I'm sorry, I don't know the young lady's name. I just remember that she was from Alberta, and she was in Victoria celebrating her birthday. So LB got some shots up, and we have a Discord site within our photography group. And when he posted the shot, I remember the first thing I said was, the composition on this image is amazing, and I love the leading lines. But then I immediately followed up that thought with, but the white balance is off. The birthday girl's skin color seems to be a little bit off. The highlights were quite obvious, and the bottom half of the image, and I'll show you this in a second, she was sitting, so everything like below the waist just seemed darker than normal. And I thought her skin tone, I talked about white balance, but I thought her skin tone was off. And then the railings, you'll see, that were silver chrome in real life, they seem to have a touch of blue in them. So because LB did JPEG and RAW, I'm going to show you the one he posted. I'm going to show you, what the RAW looks like. I'm going to edit the RAW for you, and then do a side by side. One of the misconceptions that I hope to correct here is that I get the comments a lot of time that people think that editing a raw file is an extremely time consuming process, and it doesn't have to be. I do spend a lot of time on my edits, especially if it's a portrait or something like that, but it doesn't take a long time to do an edit. And so I'm going to go through, I'm going to show you these files. I'm going to do the edit and I'm going to put myself on the clock so you get to see exactly how it's done. So let me bring up Lightroom. Okay, so what I'm going to do to start is I'm going to show you both images. So this is the image we talked about, and as you can see at the top, it's a CR3, so that's the raw file. And this next one, you may not even notice the difference. This one, you can see, is the JPEG of the same one. So the JPEG is the one that LB posted, and I looked at it, and you can see the leading lines that I talked about between if you follow the flowers, if you follow the top of the rails, if you follow the steel bars on the right, as well as the bench, it all takes your eyes away, which I think is really lovely. But I do think the highlights are prevalent and the white balance is off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the right here to the raw version. And I'm going to do an edit for you right now, and I'll put myself on the clock. And it doesn't require much, but I would show you what I would do to the raw. So let's get to it. I'll come over to the develop module first and foremost. And if I look over to the right, when I hover over the highlight, you can see everything that's showing up in red tells you what those highlights are like. But one of the things I want to show you is if you look at the white balance as shot on a raw file, if I click on this, I get all of these different choices over here. If I wanted to say auto, I could let Lightroom attempt to fix the white balance. I don't like the way that looks. It still didn't work on her skin tone to me. So I'll go back to as shot. But these options that you see here on the right don't exist for a JPEG image. All right. So this is as shot. So I'm going to start first by doing a global. I'm going to bring down some highlights a little bit. When you look at the skin tone, remember what I told you on the before I started. If you look at the top half, she's lit. But if I go down to the bottom half, I think the bottom is darker. And if you look at the cup, you might be able to see it says happy birthday. So happy birthday there. So the first thing I'm going to do is take out some of the orange. And this is just a manual edit for me, right? So I just did a reduction of about 23 there. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use an adjustment brush here. And then adjustment brush, I'm going to go over to brush. And I'm going to do an exposure. I'm going to do a minus, let's see, let's do a minus 0.2. And on the highlights, I want to do, I'll say minus 22. I'm just spitballing here to see. And then you actually take the brush and I just brush over the areas that I think need a little bit of work. So right now I'm brushing on that roof all the way down at the back. And then I'll come up to the front here, get a little bit of these rails. Just like this, going all the way down, not touching the subject yet, just brushing in a little bit to dial down. And then this is a concrete slab. So I want to bring some of that down so you can see some of the grays come back in, taking some of the highlights out of those things, right? So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to, and if we look at her hair, I think that the hair should have a slight reddish hue to it looking at the top, but if you look down in the middle here, it looks a little bit dark. So what we're going to do now is we're going to brighten up our subject a little bit. So now what I'm doing is I'm brightening up the lower section. You can see some color coming back into the foot, the purse, the midsection, the hair. And we'll go up a little like here. Yep. Dial the brush down a little bit. There we go. Get some around the neck and the face. And we'll go in here and dial some of that in to brighten up her hair and her face and neck a little bit, like so. Just bringing some of the natural colors in, not adding anything, not taking anything away. We're just working with what I call some white balance challenges. And next thing I want to do, you may recall I talked about the hue of the rails. So what I'll do over here now is I'll go over to my color palette and I'll take down some of the blues because I think some of those blues on saturation are just a little too strong. When you take those down like that, what I want to do is bring in a little bit of vibrancy For the flowers, you go up to the vibrancy right here, bring those flowers up just a touch. And if we want to get a little bit of, let's see, clarity in there, and I'm going to brush this in up here where the flowers are, just to bring in some of the pop for those flowers like that. It's also taking care of the poles for me. Very nice. I'll add some global shadows, which we hadn't done before. Brighten it up a little bit, like so. I'll do a bit of contrast, not much. I don't think that took too long, right? So we're here now. I'm going to show you side by side. And let's do a compare. And here's what it looks like on the side by side. So on the left side is our newly edited image, right? And on the right side is the original JPEG. And just with a little bit of editing, like I said, I didn't take out the food truck down at the bottom, but the darkness, I think, is gone. And we could look at a couple things. Like if we zoom in on the flowers, same flowers here. You look at the left, you can see color within like those purple ones, you know what I mean? Whereas over on the right side, it's a little darker. We talked about the legs, that section of the image. Now her lower body matches the tone of her upper body, whereas over here on the right, it's just kind of dark. We talked about the colors of the rails, not as blue. You got a little more chrome in the one on the left, although you do still have a little bit of blue in there. It's not quite as much as it is on the right, right? And then what I'll do is I'll show you these in full size just so you can see what they look like. So let's go F. Okay, so that's the JPEG. And again, there's nothing wrong with the image. I love the leading lines on it and the composition, but the colors and tones you couldn't fix in a JPEG. But if we go to the raw file now, raw file is just dramatically different. There's more light around her neck. The light is a little more evenly balanced in the image. If I go over to the JPEG version, like I was telling you before, and I hit develop, remember that thing I was showing you before about white balance? If I go up here to white balance on the right, when I click the drop down, you got two choices there. You don't get the range of choices that you get with a raw file because everything's already been decided by the camera. And again, the dynamic range, making sure that we're clear here. LB's raw file, the one on the left, was 40 megapixels, whereas his JPEG was 11. So I had the luxury of a 40 megapixel raw file that I could go into and just tweak it and kind of mess around. Now, I was in a bit of a rush. I didn't balance out the skin tone, or I didn't take it over to Photoshop. These were just some rudimentary, edits that I was able to do to show you just what I think just how good the edited version looks. All right. Okay. So in conclusion, the choice between RAW and JPEG really depends on your specific needs and preferences as a photographer. If you prioritize image quality and editing flexibility, and you have the time, because not everybody has the time, or not everybody wants to invest the time in post-processing. But if you have all those things, shooting RAW is a recommended approach, because even when you go through and do the edit that I just did, the output is going to be a JPEG anyway. But now you have a much better looking file. But on the other hand, if convenience, smaller file sizes, ease of sharing are important, then JPEG is perfectly valid, and it's a good choice for the casual shooter, and for social media, for shots that are not going to be, portfolio level, but really good photography that you're out there, making things happen with. The only caution, and I don't know if caution is the right word, but I'll use it. The only caution that I would have now is that if you're shooting JPEG only, you should really evaluate the type of camera that you have. I don't think you need, a $32, $34, $3,500 camera if in essence you're letting the camera do all of the processing for you in camera. You don't need a 40 megapixel RAW file if you're only going to be shooting JPEG. You can get the same quality and better in today's cameras with JPEG because all of the manufacturers do a great job with that. But if you're investing in a camera that can do the types of things that we just saw, and I think I'll have to check with him. I think he has the new Canon R6. I'm not a Canon person, so don't quote me. We'll check with LB on that. But that camera is amazing, and it can get into some serious depth with regards to dynamic range with files that size. So consider that. And here's the last thing I'll say on the matter. You may start one way and end up another. And again, look at me as a good guide for that. I was 100% JPEG for a number of years. I didn't see the value. I didn't want to spend time on big files. I didn't want to have to edit and those kinds of things. But the more critical my eye became at looking at light and understanding light, and if you go back to some of the prior episodes that I've done here, knowing and understanding your camera so it's second nature to you, and shooting in manual mode along with understanding the exposure triangle, then RAW fits into that ecosystem because all of those things come together. And as you do one and you do the other, it just leads you to a point where you just want the most opportunity you have. At least I did. And that's why I started shooting RAW several years ago and haven't looked back since. So that's it. If you have any thoughts on RAW versus JPEG or any questions, or you favor one over the other, please don't hesitate to drop some comments, especially on the YouTube side. We'd love to see what the rest of the community is doing. The purpose today was just to propose 5 considerations. There may be some folks shooting RAW who may be better off shooting JPEG. But more times than not, I believe that the photographers of today, non-pro, who have really good cameras would benefit tremendously, from shooting RAW if you have the time and you're willing to invest that in your editing. So let me know. With that, I'll let you go. I hope everybody's having a great summer and you're getting out there with your cameras and getting some shots up. I do appreciate you taking the time to watch if you're watching, or listen if you're following along on the podcast. It means a lot to me, and it does help the growth of the platform. So thank you. Glad you guys stopped by to check out the Focus on Photography podcast. I look forward to talking to you guys again next time. Until then, take care. Bye now.